Hello and welcome to Marketing Solutions for Local Law Firms, the podcast that provides you with all the latest digital marketing tools, tips, and strategies you will need to implement in order to stay ahead of your competition. If you are looking to substantially increase your caseload in the next 6 months, this is the podcast for you. And now, here's the host of our show, the local business guy himself, Frank Deming.
Hello, everyone. This is Frank Deming, the local business guy. Welcome to another episode of Marketing Solutions for Local Law Firms. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day, everyone. I hope you guys are having a rockin' week thus far. Today, I have a treat for you guys. I want to get a little bit off of the marketing side of things, and I want to help you in a different way. And I don't want to do it a disjustice because I want the person who I'm interviewing to tell you all about it. And I'm just going to zip my lip up, okay? Because I'm going to introduce you to the great Audrey Holst. How's it going, Audrey?
It's going well, Frank. Thanks for that introduction.
Awesome sauce. I said a few things, and I really don't want to do it in a disjustice. So why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Audrey Holst. And to keep it really basic, and we'll hit it like right from the beginning, I basically teach brain yoga for lawyers.
Yeah. I tell you guys, this is going to be a little different. Brain yoga. Explain what is brain yoga.
So basically what that means or what that does is I work with primarily lawyers. I also work with some folks in the tech industry. I also work with some folks in the finance industry. Basically, people who are really, really good at thinking, really good at using their brains, and right. Those folks tend to have a certain amount of stress and perfectionism that has helped them really thrive in their industries, but doesn't necessarily help them in the big picture of things. So I help those folks basically rewire the perfectionism into excellence so they can have that high performing, high achieving results without the negative side effects.
So given what you do, explain to me why the law industry?
Because the lawyers are a really good example of folks who have honed a very particular tool in their toolbox, right? If we think about us as human beings having this particular skill set, right? Lawyers have a very particular skill set that they're very, very good at. They're very good at analyzing. They're very good at picking things apart. They're very good at analyzing the details, and they're really good at finding out what's wrong. Like literally everything in their training has brought them to a point where they can find what is wrong with almost anything, right? And that particular way of thinking and being, unfortunately, doesn't just keep itself in work. That actually becomes a pervasive way of thinking and being as a human being. And that extends out into personal lives, right? And so I have a different set of skills, right? If you're looking at my toolbox and the lawyer toolbox, we got a very different set of skills. And the skills that I have mesh really, really well with saying, okay, well, you're really, really good at this one particular thing. Like you're really, you got a toolbox full of hammers, but you're trying to now, like what happens is people start to be like, okay, I'm starting to feel like I've got everything handled, but man, I am not feeling good. Like I'm not feeling the way I would like to be feeling, and I'm having a hard time getting there. I'm like, well, yeah, you're trying to saw this piece of wood with a billion hammers and you need a saw. So like, let's teach you that a saw exists to begin with, and let's teach you how to use it. So now you can expand your toolbox. When you expand your toolbox, you start to feel better. So that's the general, like I got a skill set that works really, really, really well with that lawyer brain.
Now you said something there that caught my attention, and I'm sure it caught a couple of other people's attention as well. You mentioned that the saw exists. So I'm assuming you mean that there's sometimes when you work with people that they don't even know that saw exists. So expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So the folks I work with are really, really good from the neck up. They solve problems. They think. Everything is very thought-based. And what I'm saying is you actually have to take a look at what happens from the neck down.
Mm.
So for instance, there's maybe a way that folks are listening to this podcast episode right now, right? You're listening to a podcast episode. I know sometimes when I'm listening to podcast episodes, I'm like puttering around the house, or maybe I'm driving, or maybe I'm on a walk or something. What I'm saying is that you may have the awareness of thinking about concepts that I'm talking about, but I also want you to be aware of the fact that a lot of your experience, the way you feel about things, the way you process things, the way you stress or don't stress, have to do with all of the nerves that run top to bottom in your body and are consistently giving you information that you may have actually learned how to block out and that you might actually want to start bringing back into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your background. For instance, what makes you qualified to help an attorney with these things?
Yeah. So background is more than 16 years in the yoga industry as both a business owner, as a manager, as a teacher, teaching full time. And prior to that, actually, I'm not sure if we had this conversation, but prior to that, I actually worked in the equine industry. So I riding, training horses, running equine businesses. So I've had basically, I've used my body as a conduit in my business for many years. And so body-based businesses. So I'm very familiar with using the body, what the body does. I'm very familiar with the nervous system and how we use the body to basically as a different way to move ourselves to the ways that we want to feel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now that's interesting. So you have a yoga background, which I always found fascinating because I know yoga is very much body mind kind of thing. And you also have a background working with horses, which is interesting as well. What got you? Well, I'm gonna have two questions. Number one, tell the audience, because I love the name of your business. Tell the audience the name of your business. I love it, and I'm going to find out where that came from. What got you into now working with people in a different capacity? I'm just trying to get the tie-in so that people can understand.
Yeah,
where you're
totally.
coming from.
Absolutely. So Fortitude Flow is the name of my business. And this is basically it's the combination of these two things that I think are really important for life in general, for human happiness, for feeling good, for doing yoga, for running a business, for everything, right? There's two elements that are important to have. There's that sort of steadfast fortitude piece. And that's one of the things that I teach, right? My Fortitude Flow process, the first pieces of it are the noticing and the discernment, which requires a certain amount of stillness and being with. And then there's also the action piece, whereas the flow piece, we can't just like sit and stare at our navels and think that anything productive is going to happen, right? There has to be action. There has to be flow. So that's action and integration. And so having these two things, and it's also interesting because a lot of folks like to use the word balance, and balance is not a static action, right? We talk about balance as if it's this one point that we achieve balance, and now we've achieved, like the skies open up and we now have balance. But if we're talking about balance in the actual sense of the word, right? If you've ever tried to balance, like even if you're listening to this podcast episode, maybe you try to balance on one foot for like a second, what happens? You can feel all of the muscles working to try to maintain that, right? It's an active state. So that's the essence of Fortitude and Flow, is this flexibility in our bodies and our minds in order to basically move through life in a way that we want to, that feels good.
Interesting, because I use the word balance a lot. I use the word like work-life balance.
Yep.
Do you work with attorneys to have a work-life balance? I mean, I don't know how to else use I don't want to use the word balance, since you just said.
I mean, that might be the word that people use, right? And that's often the sort of what people will say, right? They're looking for more of a balance where they feel like the scales have tipped a little bit too heavily in one direction, and they're starting to feel like they've lost some of the personal stuff, right? Personal time, personal interests. When they leave work, they're not actually leaving work. that sort of thing, where it seems like the job is and the work is basically following them all the time. It's like kind of an all pervasive thing, and people start to feel like, that's not actually what I want. I would like to have a little bit of a different experience. So yeah, you could say life work balance is a thing that I work with a lot.
So, all right. So let's talk about that, because I'm a person, I'm not an attorney, but I do work with a lot of attorneys, but I'm a person that I feel not in balance or not in flow if I'm not thinking about work. How do you help someone like me? Am I out of flow because of that?
So here's the thing that's really important is that this has to be something that folks are interested in,
Gotcha.
right? If people are listening to this episode and they're like, yeah, I feel great. Cool. You don't need me. This is not the episode for you at this point in your life, right? But like you said, okay, if I don't feel in flow, right? That's the term you use, right? I don't feel in flow. Okay. So the first question is, how do you know? How do you know you don't feel? What does it mean if you don't feel in flow?
To me, I don't feel when I mean in flow, is I don't feel comfortable with let's say I don't I feel like there's something always in my mind.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. I did and this is probably, maybe I need therapy, I don't know, but I did a test for once, and I went to Mexico on a week's vacation, and I purposely did not bring my laptop. Now I'm one to, when I'm on vacation, even if I bring my laptop, and in the morning, I'll go to where, let's say I'm on a resort, I'll go grab a coffee, bring it back to my room, go to the balcony, and maybe check an email, do something. So this particular time, I purposely didn't do that, and I felt out of flow.
Yes.
So I'm giving you that example.
Yes. Oh, this is such a great example. So here's the thing. The body gets used to what it gets used to.
Ouch.
So one of the things that I hear from folks a lot is, when I have downtime or when I have a moment, I'm extremely uncomfortable, right? Like if I have a second to do something that's not work, it feels wrong. And here's the thing, right? So the body wires to what it's used to. It also wires to the states that it's used to.
Gotcha.
So this is where we start to get into, okay, like let's just reference some chronic stress stuff for a second, because this is something that lawyers can probably relate to, is stress that happens on a regular basis, right? Ongoing. So the thing about the brain and the body is it's wired for efficiency. It wants to do the most efficient thing. It doesn't want to waste energy, right? That's how we are wired as human beings. Okay, let's be efficient with these resources, right? We've got limited resources, limited energy in our bodies, limited chemicals, right? All of these things. So the body's going, okay, we've got this budget. How do we want to spend our budget? And when the body on a regular basis gets used to a particular thing, maybe it's a particular level of stress, a particular level of action, a particular state, right? We can talk about things very briefly. We can talk about fight or flight or stress, right? That's sort of fight or flight. We can kind of put in that stress category. The body starts to go, oh, okay, so this is where we're spending our time usually. So let's wire for efficiency there. Now, what is efficient may not necessarily be what we want, right? It's maybe not the thing that makes us feel good. We're not saying oh, stress makes me feel good, so I want more of that. But the body is just saying, hey, we're used to this. We're doing this all the time. So let's try to get efficient at the stress thing. Now, it doesn't mean that the body actually has the resources to be doing that on a regular basis, right? It may start to scrape the bottom of the barrel on all those hormones, but it's wired that way. So what happens is when we are wired to a certain way of working, a certain way of being, a certain orientation, when we just drop that, the body goes, whoa, hold on. This is wrong, right? This is wrong. Something is wrong. And it will send up all the danger. whoa, this is not it, right? And that's where we start to feel really uncomfortable because this is not normal, right? We've kind of set a certain normal for our body's nervous systems.
Mm-hmm.
And now the body goes, this is not normal. This is weird. So you're sitting on the beach trying not to do the thing you do every single day. And your body goes, I hate this. There's something really messed up here, right? So that's one way of explaining that particular experience is it's just really uncomfortable to do things that you're not usually doing.
So just to clarify though, what you're saying is really no right or wrong, right?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hello there, listeners. If you're an attorney and you would love to be a guest on the show so you can promote your services to people that listen to the show and beyond, give us a call at 888-416-7752 or send us an email at podcast@lbmsllc.com. One of my associates in the podcasting team will send you an email and connect with you, schedule some time, send you the podcast intake form, and schedule you to be interviewed on the show. So if that's something that you really would want to do, go ahead and take one of those actions, and we'll take it from there. So until then, enjoy the rest of the show.
Well, it's like I said, it depends on what you're after. It depends on what your goals are. Listen, people are wired differently, right? I'm wired differently than a lawyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to law school. I'm not doing that. I'm not built for that. There are probably some lawyers that are like, heck no, this thing that this Audrey girl does is like not interested, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some folks have, and what we're talking about here a little bit is capacity too. Is like some folks have the capacity for a little bit more intensity. Some folks don't. Sometimes that's genetic. Sometimes that's training. But how is it treating you on a regular basis? And right, we go through cycles in our life, right? If you were in a big business growth phase, you're probably like not having a lot of work-life balance. You know what I mean? That's okay. No big deal. But if you have the expectation that you're going to be busting your butt at that same intensity level day after day after day after day after day, over and over and over, and that's not going to eventually catch up to you in some capacity, that's when the problem rolls in. So it's just really having an awareness of like, is this working for me? And if you're feeling great and it's working for you and you have no problem, fine. Right? Like, I'm not saying one way is better than another way. I'm saying what is working for you, what's not working for you, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah. But, when someone, like, for instance, I went to a conference 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about, it was a life insurance conference. And it was this one guy was talking about, disability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about, like, hey, what are you going to do if you can't work anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you going to finance it? So sometimes creating that habit of that work-life balance, is important before it becomes a problem, because those people tend to, not the fact that there's no money coming in is stressful enough, the fact that they're not able to do what they want to do becomes even a bigger burden, right?
Yes. I mean, I completely agree with that, right? Like, I'm the person that's in this, right? Like, the stuff that I'm teaching, that's what I would say. So here's the deal. Like, if your entire identity is completely affiliated with what you do to produce, what you do to make money, what you're doing at your job, what your title is, if that gets taken away, then what?
Then what? Yeah. Interesting. All right. So tell me, I really like what I'm hearing here, especially because you're right. Attorneys are high stress individuals, but so are many business owners. So if another business owner comes to you and says, "Hey, Audrey, I heard you on this podcast. I've been listening to Frank's podcast for many years. Thank you very much."
As they should. Yeah.
A shameless plug there. And I heard you, but I'm not an attorney. Can you help me?
Yeah.
What would you do?
Are you a human being with a body and a brain? Cool. Let's
Okay.
go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question is I just want to make sure that everyone knows that you just don't help attorneys. That's just your focus, right? Your focus is
That's just the folks that whenever I'm like, ooh, ideal client. Oh, you're an attorney. Oh, another ideal client. Oh, you're also an attorney. It just happens to, the attorneys just happen to be the ones that seem to be raising their hands the most whenever I was kind of in a room and folks were like, oh my gosh, I need this. Oh, you're all attorneys.
They're the ones who popped up. Yeah. Okay. Now, how long have you been doing this, by the way?
Doing this, meaning Fortitude and Flow has been around in some capacity since 2014.
Gotcha.
The law focus has been probably the last handful of years.
Would it be post-pandemic or?
It was, yeah, I feel like a lot of the transition happened around the pandemic. A lot of my transition out of the yoga stuff for good and the transitioning into something else I would say was around the pandemic time. And it also is, I think, when people started to more explicitly start to question their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think people started to step back from what it was they did for work and starting to look at what their I think it just made people look at their lives slightly differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people became a little bit more open. And when I say people, I think also I'm referencing law firms in general, started to be a little bit more open to the stuff that I teach. Like there's even people who are teaching somatics just meaning soma of the body, to lawyers, which is something that I cannot even imagine happening even 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that folks have started to realize, okay, well, if we want to, right, firms especially want to retain our employees and we want to continue to get partners coming through, we have to figure out a way to retain that talent, because people were starting to look at the people above them going, I don't know if I want that person's job.
Interesting. Now, if you have been an avid listener of my show, as you should have been, Audrey, you know I always ask the following question to everyone. I want a war story. Give me a war story of where you thought Audrey Holst showed up at her best and helped this said attorney turn it around.
Ooh, I've got a couple of those.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, there's a couple of pieces from attorneys that I've worked with at big law firms that I think are like little snapshots that I think are really interesting. So one of them, I was working with an attorney who had transitioned from one law firm that was really like rough on her. The culture was like not a good fit. She did not do well. She ended up moving to this other firm. But here's the thing, she changed firms, but a lot of the sort of conditioned responses that she had basically built up in her body from the previous firm followed her over. And so she really had this, she was dealing with a lot of anxiety, especially like starting the work week. And I was talking with her about it, and she explained to me how in the previous firm that she worked, when she first came into the building, she basically had to walk by all the partners' offices. And the way she explained to me, and you have to really like listen to the words that people use, and the words that people use are really important, and the way they phrase things. And she said, I felt like I was walking by the lion's den every morning. And I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And she said, so every time I would come into the building, I would walk through that front door, I would basically get this huge rush of like anxiety. I'm like, well, you literally just said you felt like you were walking by a lion's den. Of course you did, right? Like, of course you did. And so this was the sort of embodiment, right? Her body started to wire for this, like, okay, danger, right? The body is going to go for danger signals. Coming in the door, I'm wired for danger. Now what happens is I've got this vigilance thing going on, and now this is in my system. And she didn't have any sort of tools to like calm herself down or think, okay, this is not actually what's happening, right? Because I didn't even recognize that was happening to begin with. So working together, we start to basically rewire her response to like coming into work, this anxiety, noticing this anxiety, having some tools to deal with that. So that was one. I had one attorney who basically was going through these litigation cycles where like they were like working like really intense hours, but then they would have like downtime and they didn't know how to relax or deal with themselves. And then they go into these really intense, right? Kind of like you were describing, where it's like the ups and downs, not really being able to deal with the ups and downs. So first of all, I had to be like, we're triaging here. Like you have to understand that like you can't have the expectation that you can work these amount of hours like on a regular basis and be okay. Like, I'm just going to tell you that flat out. Like, that's not reasonable. It's not reasonable because you're a human being. If you're a machine, that's one thing. So like, let's set the expectation that we're going to have your triage survival tools, but then we have to transition you out of those triage periods and like figure out how to help you come back down to a baseline outside of those periods, right? So you're not just operating up at this high stress level outside of those time periods. So that was super helpful. And then I had an attorney who just had kind of set this particular bar of expectation that was not realistic, and it wasn't actually being asked of her. She was kind of like taking on these things, and she realized she was picking up balls that she didn't need to pick up. She was sort of the like hero. So I have all these archetypes, perfectionist archetypes. And she was kind of like the hero perfectionist, where she was like, take it on. I will, I'll take it. I'm going to save the day. Like I thrive in chaos. And so we started working together, and she's like, oh shoot. Like I'm starting to have the awareness that I'm picking up these things that like, actually, I don't need to pick any of these up. Like I'm picking these up because I feel an obligation. Like I'm supposed to be picking these things up. And she started just like, and I don't want to say setting boundaries, because she honestly was just like, oh, I'm going to start to be a little bit more discerning about the things that I actually need to hold and not hold. And that changed her entire like workflow, like 100%.
So let me ask you something though, because that's a very unique thing, because it sounds to me that it almost seems like she didn't think she needed you. So how did she come to meet you in the first place? Because those people who would like to pick up ball, they just think that's their flow, right? That's their natural flow. So how did that whole thing come about?
Well, she basically heard me speak about perfectionism. Okay. Right. She heard me speak about perfectionism and describing perfectionism. And she was like, okay, so you just described me to a T. Gotcha. And I can see this path that I'm going down, and I'm seeing that like this is not sustainable, and I would like to step off this path and explore a different way of moving through the forest. Like this well-worn thing is not working for me.
So she was what I refer to as an awareness lead.
Mm-hmm.
You brought awareness to something that she didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then she started painting a picture herself, and then she reached out. That's awesome. Those are the best leads. Those awareness leads are awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And there has to be some sort of awareness. If for the stuff that I do, there's got to be some sort of awareness, right? Like it really is the starting. Yeah. People have to be curious about it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, like when we do our marketing for attorneys, we have two types. We'll have like, a need. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's more on the Google AdWords side of things. And then there's an awareness. And that's more of a social media thing where we target certain people. And when they see something, they go, oh, and then they don't realize they didn't need it until they saw your ad. So those are awareness ones. So anyway, so it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Cool. Well, that is outstanding. Outstanding. I love those war stories. Now when give us a little of a sample of what is it like to work with you? Like, let's say, I'm walking down the street and I'm an awareness person. I see a billboard about your services, and I'm like, hey, that sounds like me, kind of thing. Like what's that process like?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the actual logistics process, I can give you a brief overview of that. So basically, folks find me, usually they jump onto the website, or maybe they've listened to a podcast like this and they've headed over to the website. They may listen to another podcast episode of something else I've done. But basically the first step in actually getting into work with me is just to have a conversation, right?
Mm.
We do a flow assessment that basically helps people understand, their foundations, their challenges, what's looking really strong for them, what's looking really challenging for them. And basically, is this a fit? Right? Because I'm not a fit for everybody, and not everybody's a fit for me. So we basically have a conversation to say, okay, what are the challenges? What are your perceived challenges? Where do you think you're really having a hard time? And is that something that I can help you with? We'll see. And then we might move forward from there. And then in terms of like actual sessions with me. So I am one of maybe, I don't even know. I may be like one of the only coaches that I know that still does coaching over the phone. Right? Everybody's moved on to Zoom.
So you don't have a Zoom setup.
I mean, I've got
for your coaching.
For my clients, I like phone. And it is funny because a lot of them are like, I never use my phone for this purpose, except for like my calls with you. But here's the deal. I want folks to be able to be connected to themselves physically while we are having our coaching sessions.
Interesting.
So I'll have them take a walk. I'll have them move around the room. I'll have them try a bunch of stuff. Yep. Because
could they be on the treadmill?
They could be on the treadmill. Listen, if you want to be on the treadmill and you can still have a conversation with me, good for you, right? Like you want to work on your cardio while you're working on your yoga, your brain yoga. Cool. Let's do that. So yeah. So I, maybe it's just because, I miss the 90s, but I don't know. But I like for folks to be able to move around and especially because a lot of folks that I work with are sort of performative in general. Not having a camera on them helps them to kind of free up a little bit too.
Yeah. You don't have to be in front of the computer or whatever. Interesting. I like that. I have not heard that in a long time, to be honest with you.
I know. It feels very archaic, but you know what? Analog life is not the worst thing. And I feel like we need a little bit more of the skill sets that we had in the analog world than we have gotten from the digital world.
Ooh. You mentioned your website. What is that website so people can check it out?
Yeah, that website is fortitudeandflow.com.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Is there any kind of special gift or anything like that you want to give anyone just for listening to this? And that way, that, hey, they listened and they're following through that you want to share?
Sure. So we have two options. One of them is understanding your perfectionist archetype, which a lot of folks really enjoy. So you would go to the website and then /perfectionist, and that would teach you about the different archetypes. So I've done hours and hours and hours and hours of qualitative interviews with self-proclaimed perfectionists. And through these interviews, I've basically discovered that there are certain archetypes that people fall under. And understanding what your archetype is helps you to understand, okay, if I want to shift this, then there are certain steps that are most helpful to put my concentration on. So that is something to consider. And then I also have a guide for conscious leaders, which I believe I think we have the link to. I think you have the link to that you might be able to put in the show notes as well.
Yes, I'll put that in the show notes as well. All right, yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, do you let's say, because I know you said you only work with people who know that they need you. But let's say I don't know that I need you. Let's say, I'm maybe in denial. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right term, but I just don't know. Do you have something that will say, okay, take this test? Is that what you're talking about? Take this test and this will tell you if you need me or not? Well,
I think checking out, the Perfectionist Archetypes, I think, is a good place to go because it basically describes what do the archetypes look like? What are the behaviors? What are the thoughts? Right. So if you can identify with some of the thoughts of these particular people, like my inertia archetype, those are the procrastinators. If you're one of those folks that you're like, ooh, procrastination, man, we are having a good time together. Yeah. You might be an inertia. You might be a inertia perfectionist, if you're one of those folks that maybe you've had the feedback on perhaps your micromanaging, on your inability to tolerate mistakes from yourself and others, it's possible that you're a classic perfectionist. So
this assessment is kind of like a DISC assessment, but Audrey Holst style.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And people usually go through and they're like, oh my gosh, there's like, I recognize different pieces, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that's normal because you're a human being. Everybody has little pieces of everything. And is there one that you particularly felt most drawn to? And like, let's start there.
I'm fascinated by that. And I really hope that the listeners take you up on that and check that out. I'm going to put a link to it on the show notes, of course. And I want them to really go there and do an assessment. It doesn't hurt to know what kind of archetype you are. Mm-hmm. I, for one, feel that I am a I procrastinate a lot, and a little bit of perfectionism, maybe. But I do know for a fact, and this is above those two, I have trust issues with team members. We communicate on Slack a lot, and I'm always checking, hey, we just had a conversation about it. Did you email that client about, what we talked about? Yeah, that's a trust issue. But it's only because, and I know where it comes from. I've been burnt many times from team members about, yeah, I'm going to take care of this. And then 2 weeks later, oh, I never did it.
Yeah, right. Sure.
It comes for a reason.
Yeah, of course. Everything comes from a reason.
Yeah. So I don't know. I may need your help. Yeah. But anyway, awesome. I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but this has been great. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience have learned a lot. I would love to, and I don't extend this invitation many times, but this has been such an intriguing thing, and I know there's a lot of stuff that we need to uncover. Love to have you back at some point. Yeah. Maybe this season or next season or whatever, but we'd love to have you back at some time just to catch up to see what's going on, how many people you've helped since we've talked. So if you're open to that, I'd love to extend that invitation. But before I let you go, is there anything I did not ask you that you think would benefit the audience?
I think maybe the question being like, what is the number one thing that the audience could do right now that could start them down path on this new journey?
It's an awesome one. Yep, I did miss that, and I apologize. So what is that thing?
Well, I kind of mentioned a little bit, and it's funny, in my head, I'm like, oh man, we didn't even get a chance to practice things today. So people just got like a little bit of the taster of the concept. So we didn't really get a chance to practice. So
let's do it.
While people are listening, I'm just going to extend a little invitation here to, if you are at a computer listening, maybe take your eyes away from the computer. If you're walking around, I would just ask you to take a few moments just to notice your environment. And what I mean by that is just look around you. Look above you, look below you. Actually turn your head and look over each of your shoulders. I want you to notice the speed at which you're looking around. And I want you to notice if you're actually noticing anything. Are your eyes moving so fast that you're not actually seeing what's going around you? Are you actually looking and seeing and noticing what's going on around you? So this is just a little bit of a taste, and I want you to see how that lands for you as you look around. If you're in a room, I want you to actually look into the corners of the room, like each corner. What's in the corner? If there are windows in the room, look out the windows. If there's a door in your room, look out the door. And I just want you to notice how your body responds to looking around this room. And that's your little starting teeny tiny. It's like I just walked by you with a little, hot dog with a toothpick in it. You just like took a little bite out of it. See how that hot dog tastes and whether you want some more.
It's the environment. I totally get it. The environment.
That's a start. That's a piece of it.
That's great. I'm glad I asked that question. I'm glad you came up with that sample. I hope you guys took her up on that and find out what is it that is around you. And then not only that, go to the show notes right now and fill out that assessment. That way you know what kind of archetype you are. So thanks a lot again, Audrey, for coming. With that, I am going to put it into this episode. Check out the show notes, check out her website, check out all the stuff we've talked about. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. I'm sorry, I know you're going to get a lot out of it. And this is not the last you've seen of Audrey, for sure. I'm going to put an end to this episode. This has been Frank Deming, the local business guy, and you've just been truly blessed by the great Audrey Holst. Take care, everyone. Until next week. Peace out.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Marketing Solutions for Local Law Firms, the podcast that provides you with all the latest digital marketing tools, tips, and strategies you will need to implement in order to stay ahead of your competition. If you would like to know more about the topic we discussed on the show today, reach out to Frank and his team at 888-416-7752 and schedule a discovery call with one of the marketing consultants. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, send an email to podcast@lbmsllc.com and we will put you on the schedule. With that being said, until next week, make it a successful digital marketing day. Peace out.